Hi, welcome to the Modzy Deployment Tool tutorial. My name is Munday and I'm a data scientist here at Modzy. Today I'm excited to walk you through the process of taking your package model and deploying it to the Modzy platform. At this point, whether you are a customer or a third-party model provider, you've likely built, trained, and packaged your model, which means it is now time to deploy that model into production. Before we get started, I'd like to provide a little bit of context to set the stage as to where this tutorial fits into the MLOps pipeline. Here at Modzy, we built a solution that makes the operationalization of AI quick and easy. After developing and packaging our machine learning models, we use a deployment tool to import them into the Modzy platform. Let's dive in and see what we need to get started. To follow along with me today, you'll need to make sure that your model is ready for a smooth deployment by checking that it meets the following criteria. Number 1, the model returns the expected output. Number 2, the model is wrapped in a container image that meets our specifications. Number 3, you push your container image into a Docker registry. And number 4, you collected all relevant model metadata, including hardware requirements, input and output specifications, and other important details about your model. In this tutorial, I will deploy a basic image classification model. This model should be familiar to you if you followed along in our model packaging video. The difference here is I'm going to take that model that we containerized in that video and deploy it to the Modzy platform so I can use it in production. There are 5 easy steps in the model deployment tool we'll cover today. First, we'll upload our model's Docker image. Next, we will specify some memory and hardware requirements for our model. Third, we will fill in our model's input and output requirements. And once these steps are complete, we will fill in some content to be included in our model details page. And lastly, we will review what we uploaded and publish our model. Let's get started. In your own instance of Modzy, select the Models option under the AI Management dropdown. This will take you to the page where it will show all the active, inactive, and draft models available to you. In the top right corner right here, select the large blue Upload Model button to begin uploading your model. This will prompt you with a few ready to get started checkpoints, ensuring that you've built your model, you've packaged your model according to our specifications, and that you've pushed your model image to a Docker registry. The first step of this process is to give my model a name and a version. This name will represent your model in the marketplace, so make sure to select a name representative of the model's functionality so users can search for it easily. I'm going to name my model Tutorial Image Classification and indicate version 0.0.1. For more information on versioning, you can check out our versioning guide via the link at the bottom of this screen to learn more about how we version our models here at Modzy. As it stands today, the Modzy deployment tool can support Docker images that live in a Docker registry somewhere. You are also able to save Docker images with a Docker save command that creates a tar archive of that Docker image. And we will support that in the near future, but as it stands today, using the deployment tool, you must save your Docker image to a Docker registry. So here I will select the Docker registry option. Here I am going to enter the Docker registry URL that points to my model's Docker image. Behind the scenes, the platform will use a Docker pull command to download the specified Docker image to begin the upload process and run some tests. So here I'm going to paste in my Docker image's Docker registry link, which points to the Modzy registry where we maintain and store our models. Should your registry require credentials, you can select this box here and fill in the required credentials needed to access this registry. Once you have filled all this information in, you can click Save and Next. We've now successfully completed the first step in the deployment tool process. The next step in the model deployment process allows us to specify the hardware requirements that are needed to run your model container. Ultimately, These specifications will vary depending on the model, and will only be made possible based on the available resources in the user's environment. So we simplify these options for you. Let's take a look at these 4. As you can see here, we have 4 different options. Each option includes a few different hardware specification metrics, namely memory size, CPU count, and GPU count. Memory size, or RAM, is the amount of system memory needed to run the model container. The CPU count field indicates the number of CPUs required to run your model container. And similarly, the GPU count field allows us to tell Modzy whether or not our model containers require GPUs to run. The 4 resource options broadly cover the different types of models you may be uploading: small, medium, high, and large. Small would be models that do not necessarily leverage large deep learning frameworks, such as linear regressions or language classifiers. Medium, for CPU-reliant models that do not leverage deep learning frameworks either, but process large data sets. Large, for CPU-reliant models that need extra memory to handle large data sets or use small deep learning architectures. And then the large GPU option is best for CPU-reliant models that need extra memory to handle very large data sets and deal with large deep learning frameworks, where the addition of a GPU is beneficial. For our model, the image classification model that leverages a ResNet 101 fairly large and common deep learning architecture, I'm going to select this large option. Lastly, we can tell Modzy how long we expect our model to load and run. The timeout status is the maximum amount of time for a job to load a model and be ready to make predictions, whereas a timeout run is the maximum amount of time to execute inference for a single input. In other words, the amount of time it takes from when a job is requested to when a job finishes. Should the platform hit the maximum time while loading the model or running inference, the system will stop and return an error. Since my model runs pretty quickly, I'm going to conservatively fill in 60 seconds for the status for the model to load and 30 seconds for the model to run. Now, when I finish this page and click Next, in the background, the Modzy platform will perform the first of 2 validation tests throughout the deployment process. In this test, the platform will spin up the model container and check that the status API endpoint returns a valid response. As a reminder, there are 3 API routes each model container must respond to. I'd encourage you to check out our container specifications if you need a refresher. This may take a few minutes depending on the amount of available resources in your environment. The size of the container or network connection can also be factors in how long this particular test takes. As you can see, our container passed. So now I'm going to continue on to the next step. We have now made it about halfway through the deployment process. If you're following along and want to take a break, make sure to click this Quit button in the bottom left part of the screen, and your progress will be saved in your drafts on the Models page. Otherwise, let's move on to the next step. This next step in the model deployment process is critical for making sure your model is usable on the Modzy platform. During this stage, we will specify some important information about the inputs your model accepts and the outputs it will return. The first thing I want to point out here is that there are separate sections for the inputs and outputs. You'll notice the drop-down for inputs and drop-down for outputs. Within each drop-down, you have the option to include as many inputs or outputs as your model accepts. This basic model, image classification model I am working with today, only takes a single image as input and outputs a single JSON file. But if your model accepts multiple inputs or outputs, you can customize this page by adding inputs or outputs. Right here or right here. Let's start by filling in all the required information for my inputs. As I mentioned, my basic image classification model will only accept a single image as input. The first field I'm going to fill in is the name of the input file. If you followed along for our packaging video, you will have remembered the portion where we filled out our YAML file. And in this case, since I'm using a model that was packaged from that template, some of this information must match, and so I'll get this information directly from that YAML file, where I fill my input name in as image. The input description for this image will simply be an image to be classified by the model. Moving down the page, I now need to upload a sample input file that will be used and passed through our model for testing. If you followed along with me in the packaging video, you'll remember this picture of the dog that we use multiple times to test our model, our basic image classification model. As it pertains to the API endpoints that our container must respond to, this test behind the scenes after we click next and move on from this step will be making sure the container returns a successful response to the run API endpoint. The last two fields to fill in are important checks for the platform to use. First, I must include the file types the model can support for this input. If you recall from the packaging video, I specified that our model would be able to read in JPEG and PNG file types. This gives you the opportunity to limit or increase the number of input types your model accepts as an extra layer of validation. For example, if you are working with a natural language processing model, you may want your model to accept both plain text and JSON files. As a quick aside, these fields are specifying the MIME type, which is a standard way to identify the file type in the software development world. For more information on MIME types, feel free to visit the link in the screen below. I'm now going to close out my input by indicating a maximum file size. The platform will use this information analogously to how it used the file types as an extra layer of validation. I'm going to indicate that my model can accept up to 50 megabytes in size of an image. I am now going to repeat the same steps I performed on these inputs to my output section. The only difference here is that the API will use this information to take the outputs of your model container and write an output file. So I'm going to start by calling this results.json, describing this output as a top 5 model predictions, and indicating that this is an application/JSON MIME type file with a maximum of 1 megabyte size. Okay, great. So now that I've filled in all of the input and output information for my basic image classification model, I'm going to click this next button and see what happens. Again, since on the back end, the platform is taking the sample input file I uploaded and running it through the model container for processing and inference, this step may take a bit, depending on the amount of available resources in your environment. As you can see here, my model successfully performed inference on this image file. You can see the results right here on the page, which is pretty cool. You'll notice that the returned object provides both the start time, the end time of the job, and the results.json file, which holds the top 5 predictions, where it indicates the image class and the prediction probability. Again, if you followed along with the packaging video, this will look familiar to you, as it's the same output we continuously saw. We have now successfully made it through most of the deployment process, which is exciting news. Let's move on to the next step and make our model details page look great. The last main step in the model deployment process is filling in some information for our model details page. As a reminder, the model details page is where you can show off how great your model is to all the users within your organization. For reference, here's an example of the page we are going to assemble right now. This is an object tracking model available in the commercial marketplace, where you see some information about what the model does and the inputs it takes, how the model performs and on what data sets it was evaluated on, some technical details about what was used to build the model, architectures, frameworks, methodologies, training strategies, and a how-to section with the API request and response. Keep in mind as we go through this page, we can easily edit this information if we make any errors or if something looks off down the line. For the sake of this tutorial, I'm going to use this placeholder text. But this first short description will be a sentence summary of what my model does. This will be included on the back of the model card in the marketplace. Next, the longer description allows me to provide an overview of my model. In this overview, I will give a brief summary of what the model does, what inputs it takes, and what the expected outputs are. In the release notes section, under version information, I can include a short phrase that summarizes the version of the model. Things like initial release or a summary of model performance would all suffice. The performance metrics section allows you to describe the dataset that was used to validate your model and indicate how your model performs. Since I have not evaluated this sample model, I'm going to just make up some metrics to demonstrate how this works. So as you can see here, I can add another metric, add a custom metric, call this metric 2. I'm going to make this a percentage, give it a 0.99% value with some more placeholder text in here. Moving down the page, we can use the technical details section to fill in any relevant model design, training, validation, or architecture information. This field below accepts markdown language, so should you want to include different subsections with titles, headers, etc., you are free to do so here. And what's neat about some of these features is that you're allowed to preview the content you write here and make different markdown, bolding, italicize, or other formatting changes as you wish. You'll notice this next section, the How-To API request and response, are pre-populated for us. During the last step when we uploaded that sample input file, the platform on the back end ran an inference test and it saved the API request and response that were generated to fill in these fields for us. These are important because it provides the user a sample JSON file passed through the API when submitting a job request, allowing them to replicate the process when they use this model. The images section allows you to upload an image to represent your model and make it stand out aesthetically. This image will appear on your model tile, your model card in the marketplace, and on the top of your model details page. You'll notice here I uploaded this image of the dog that we've been using for examples throughout this entire process with this particular model. And this section here is where your organization's name and logo are set in the account level, which is determined when your organization gets its own instance of Modzy. The last step on this page is to select some tags that will be used to filter your model in the marketplace. You must select at least one tag from each group. So this will do label or classify for task, video, image, and illustrations for subject, and image for input type. This will ensure a user can easily find your model when searching for the model by task, subject, or data type. Optionally, you can add custom tags if you wish. We've now made it to the last page of the model deployment tool. Fortunately, you're able to review what you've done prior to publishing your model. So let's see what that looks like. As you can see, this is the picture of the dog that I uploaded for this tutorial image classification model. Some placeholder text, these fake metrics I included, technical details, and the API request and response that were generated after the inputs and outputs page. So when I'm all happy with what I see, I can publish my model and go straight to the model details page and see my model in action. And this is now a part of my organization's instance model marketplace, where anybody who has access to this instance can go and access, see, and use this model. Thank you for taking the time to learn more about how we deploy our models to the Modzy platform. I would encourage you to check out some of the other resources and how-tos on Modzy.com to learn more about the product and how it can accelerate the process of building AI-powered applications. Please do not hesitate to reach out with any additional questions you have. Thank you.